But where we live and how we live together is a huge source of meaningfulness where we can see and create a role for ourselves that has significance in what's important. So real estate as an opportunity to begin to create a field in which people can start to see, wow, this is why I love this place. If there's really something, what can I do to make sure that that specialness is here? And then what we need to do is to understand that we can't wall it off. We kill it the minute we wall off. Life doesn't work that way.
This is the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Revitalizing the world together. Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. This is your host, Neal Collins. It is a show that is supported by our work at Latitude Realty. In it, we explore our natural and built environments and how they can be used as a force for good. The show sets out to inspire impactful ideas, meaningful change, human wellness, and ecological restoration through interviews and easy-to-digest conversations. Our guests range from industry leaders to iconoclasts, from both well-known figures to everyday people leading extraordinary lives. This is a show for people looking for education and inspiration on how real estate can be done differently. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is your host, Neal Collins. This is another episode of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I should call it Conversations, but today's guest, I am just truly honored to have come on. Her name is Pamela Mang. She is coming to us from New Mexico. And she is one of the original founders of the Regenesis Group, an organization that we take a lot of credence and have a lot of admiration for. So Pamela, thank you so much for joining us. It is an absolute pleasure.
Well, it's certainly my pleasure.
Pamela, we were just talking, and I want to catch the audience up because this is now being recorded. I was telling Pamela earlier that the conversations before and after these podcast interviews are the juiciest for me. And I was telling Pamela that what I've gone down this process of regeneration is really realizing that this is more of a process and a philosophy, much more than it is in the built environment of the representation of what regenerative design is. And I think the best way into that conversation is to really understand what your story is and what your process has been, and the moments or the background of where you come from and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
So if I might, I'd like to maybe make a little preface to that, because one of the things that, as we were talking about earlier, is our work has long threads of lineage that go back, and they weave together, but there are some core themes to them, and one of the core themes that has enabled this lineage to move across from very esoteric, spiritual, psychological, ecological, scientific come together is this thread of harmonizing inner and outer life. That when we bring together who we are as a being and the inner being we are with the world and its life and desire to express itself and its potential, is when there's no limit. We say there's literally no limit to potential when we can bring that together. But we have for so long now separated ourselves, our inner self, from who we are, from what we do in the world. And we've suffered, and our world has suffered, and all life has. So that's that piece, whether you're talking about a person and their family, whether you're talking about somebody living in a place in their neighborhood and the watershed they're in, it flows all the way through there, that inner harmonization. So that's kind of, in some ways, a context for how I fell into this work. I actually grew up in Canada. I'm a fourth generation Californian, but moved when I was quite young with my family. And I think, from the youngest I can remember getting excited about things, it was, how do we make a better world? I thought war was, why does anybody engage in war? So stupid. Why did they ban books? I mean, it was just sort of, I don't know where it came from, but I kind of entered the world with that. And it basically followed me through. At Stanford, I got involved with the Vietnam War. I was working on that. We were very heavily involved in the summer freedom rides and organizing them and supporting them for civil rights, peace marches, and so on. And somewhere along the line, in all that busy doingness, something happened to me that really profoundly shifted the level I knew I needed to set my life at. And it revolved around our first child, my daughter, Jessica. She was born in 1970. And I was still very active and running around. And that was, it was 3 years later that Carol Sanford and I met around my son's birth, and our daughters became best friends. So we hooked up, we got involved in a lot of, she was also very oriented in causes. We started a little nonprofit that we're going to help nonprofits bring their message out. And then Jessica got cancer. And she was with us in that journey for about 2.5 years before she died. But one of the things that occurred to me as I went through that with her was I realized that, people talk about old souls. It's not a cliche when you live with one. And this was the kind of child who, at 3, was drawing stick figures, holding hands, and looked up and said to me, Mom, I have 1 million friends. I just haven't met them yet. And that was kind of the tone. And so I was so busy in my life that I didn't appreciate it. I think it's true with my husband as well. We lived with this amazing being. And when she found out she had cancer, at the same time, an aunt, a great aunt, had died and left a will. And she said, I want to write a will. And she was about to go in and she had to have her leg amputated for this bone cancer. And she wrote a will, just ripped it off, said, my soul will go to your heart. My love will go to everyone. My belongings go to the world. And I think that was the beginning, but we were so focused on, we're going to get her well. We're going to stay optimistic. And then when she left, and I began to realize who she was and what she'd given us, it's like, how do you recalibrate the level you want to live life at when something like that happens? Because I think without the gift she gave, I would still be driving on causes and organizing and moving things forward and trying to convince people. And I realized that's, Matthew Fox often has said that we ought to be called human doings, not human beings. And at that time, same time, Carol had begun to bring me into this group she'd been starting to get involved with, which was called The Network. And it was Charlie Crone was one of the key people in it. And there were some others who had been working with him over years. And that once I stepped into that work and realized that was the work that at its core, it drew on Sufism, Buddhism, fourth way work, John Bennett's systematics, and in understanding how, and Subud was his particular. So it was strains of the spiritual strains of understanding how living systems worked, and around the focus of how do we work on becoming agents of evolution as simply trying to change things and fix things. And who do we need to be able to do that? And that was the piece that, I'd done a lot of workshops, courses, and all of that, but the continuous, relentless focus on we need to develop our own being, and if we are going to actually be something, create something of worth to life. And we take responsibility for supporting others in that. So that was, that's a little long loop about, but that connected me to this work at a level that I don't think would have ever happened if I'd stepped into it and said, okay, we can really take care of sustainability. We can deal all of that. It's from the beginning, it pulled me into that much deeper connection of commitment and responsibility for my own internal growth and consciousness, if I was actually ever going to be able to support the world becoming more conscious. And so that was the beginning of it.
What resonates is two different things that I'm curious your thoughts on. Is the first is I'm not sure if you've heard the term of a mythopoetic identity, and this is something that we picked up from Bill Plotkin, who talks about really understanding your place and your value within the greater system in the cosmos, but also how that intersects with the Japanese concept of ikigai, which is finding your sense of place of what you're passionate about, what your skills are, and what the world needs. And I'm curious if you find that you've discovered the person in the mythopoetic identity that may have been out there, either waiting for you to discover it, or if you have intentionally kind of evolved into it and created it.
I don't think there's an either or. I think there's a synchronicity in the way life unfolds, and that was a coming together that emerged it, but then it required me to step forward and do the work. And it took a while because the network was primarily focused on working with large multinational corporations. Their focus, which isn't often talked about, was they were focusing on corporations that did what you would call a primary transfer. These are the ones who had the major impact on the earth and transforming earth and life materials into something for humans to use. And so it was very completely focused but they were highly successful because it made companies be a lot more viable, a lot more successful in what they were doing. But the whole point of it was to transform how people saw themselves in relationship to the business and the places the earth that they worked in. I was not interested in business, but it was where I could learn. And so I worked for, I guess, about 15 years where I was really focusing in on. But it was not where my heart was. If you think about the next step, it really was. And my husband, who was deeply involved in sustainability, and he was a developer, but his concern was the earth. And so when we moved to Santa Fe, after finally making that decision, and I knew that I didn't want to stay in business. We sat and sort of talked through it, looking out over the Guadalupe Plain and Galisteo, that we became clear that really this is about how do we actually bring this rich, deep tradition of evolutionary change, because the focus was on a whole technology for developing thinking and being transformation that supported evolution as opposed to simply material change. Evolution that fit with the way life actually works over 4 billion years. And so we happened to run into, because of a project we were involved in locally, some folks from permaculture who were based in the southwestern Santa Fe, who were pioneers in bringing Bill Mollison. And this was in the mid-90s. And we ended up sitting in our living room. We lived up the hill looking out over Los Alamos across the valley, and decided that like the primary transform in terms of manufacturing, that the companies, that those who did a primary transform in terms of transforming how we inhabited the planet was the place we wanted to focus on. And that's what brought together sort of ecological design and a thinking technology that collectively were focused on how do we grow the capability for people to be able to do this, to bring it into their lives. And we spent, the first up until the middle 2005, 6, and then working in projects, building our technology, adapting what I learned in Charlie's network, adapting permaculture, ecological design, the thinking technology. And what really made it work with place as the sort of overarching reconciler that could evoke a deeper sense of caring and connection that called us to be who we are and be better about it, not simply keep making things better. And so we worked on that, developed it, and that was how we ended up in it. I mean, we saw ourselves as students the entire time. And then we started getting people we started getting all of these requests. How do we do what we do? You do. I want to learn how to do it. Come on. Can you be and give me an internship? And I kept saying, we'd be terrible at an internship. We're, a bunch of pioneer species. We'll neglect you. Well, no, it's a terrible thing to do. And it was actually Carol who sort of started beating me around the ears and saying to everybody, you need to begin to develop a way to develop people and create this career. And you've got it. You're okay. You've got enough. It will never be perfect. And so we formed the Regenesis Institute for Regenerative Practice as a nonprofit. And we set that up and created what we call the Regenerative Practitioner. And that was the first one. We took a year to create it. First one we ran 3 series in a year. We had no idea what we were doing. We did it by phone, with all of us so used to. It was the only thing available was, unless you paid for one of the really expensive professional networks, was by telephone. And we had little scripts. It was just insane. I bless all the time those, and many of them, hung out with us and began to work with us who were hung in there. But anybody who worked through that was astounding. And so since then as we began to figure out more and more how to work on this, to get help, to be going. So that's what we've been doing in terms of trying to see what our contribution was and our unique role within this work. And we, there's a range of things involved in it.
It's really interesting to hear the genesis of the Regenesis group, because I find that we are the sum of our experiences, and so much of it we're just bringing in outside influences, and we're
the sum of what we do with our experiences.
What do you mean by that?
How I process life and how I process my experiences is what creates who I am and continuously evolves and develops me. I can have a lot of experiences in the terms of I do this, I do that, I've been here, I've been that. But if I'm not this is the inner and outer dimensions of it. If I'm not in building an inner world that's processing and seeing the meaning and seeing that what that opens up requires, creates new potential, then I'm just a tourist in my life. I'm observing it and being acted on it. So in a sense, it's a sum, but it's a huge loss if we simply ride along as an observer of life and participator of what's going on outside us. If I sit and think about what's the real meaning of what I've just been through, And what does that now tell me about what the next step or what I need to from me, and what is possible, what's potential that I care about?
Where I think we can go from here is, what's the attraction for people that maybe hearing, what we're doing is helping to co-evolve all life on planet. And I've heard from people, myself included, like whenever you're first confronted with these statements or this approach, that it can be a bit esoteric. And I'm curious of the people that have entered into your world, of like, what do you think attracted them, and how do you see them applying regenerative philosophy?
Well, it's more than a philosophy. It's really literally is a technology for how to develop a different way of understanding and making meaning of a complex world around us, and focusing in on how to engage with it in a way that we become of increasing contribution to that world moving through its own greater focus of more value and evolution. So that's a big mouthful. But the people who are attracted are people who already gained skills, been through a process of building a certain expertise and experience, and have come out of that with the sense of, there is more that I should be able to do that I can't. The what I see is needed around me, what I care about, there's more potential than I'm able to realize for what I care about and for myself. We actually, in the website, the sort of entry point for this is this fairly in-depth criteria that say this is work for you if, and list out some criteria. If you feel like there's more that you're able to contribute than you've been able to do through your current working, and sort of list that through. And it's intended as a sort of a self-assessment of, this is the path. And it's like opting into something rather than, we don't recruit. We actually really want people to feel like they're ready to take a next step up and take seriously the change that's required in them in order to contribute to the change in the world that they want to make. So that's mostly, it's people who see there's potential being left on the table, and it's needed from me and from those I work with and am around.
Hey everybody, this is Neal. We are going to get back to this great conversation in just 1 second. But I think it's fair to say that right now we are facing some pretty unprecedented challenges in the 21st century. I mean, you name it, environmentally, socially, economically, we've got some big problems that we need to overcome. And that's why, for me personally, and the people that work with us at Latitude, we want to dedicate our time and our energy so that we are not only working to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, but also make the world a better place. And so if you are at all interested in combining your sustainability values with a very powerful financial model of real estate, then I highly encourage you to check out what we are doing at Latitude. We are creating something truly special with a tribe of change agents that for now is working across North America. And hopefully one day in the future, with you coming on board, we can be working across the globe. So please check us out. You can go to www.chooselatitude.com, or you can find us on social media at latitude.realty on Instagram, and we are also on Facebook. Okay, let's get back into it.
What it starts with is, how do we actually engage with what's real, is another way to say it. We've created for 200 or 300 years a set of beliefs about the way life works that is based on flattening and simplifying in order to manage it well to human purposes. And it's like the sort of watchword for how we work is manageable uniformity. And that's particularly in terms of the field we started with, which was how would we inhabit our world. think about it. How often in development, in building and design, and all of the other things that the infrastructure and so on that support how we inhabit it, how we educate people and kids, how we design the criteria for all, how do we create manageable uniformity has been sort of the major source of direction for how we design and plan much of the way human economic and living life continues, which is just the opposite end of the way the beautiful complexity of what life really is. And so one of the things that more and more people are beginning to talk about regeneration as, actually, I think Paul Hawkins got a new book out where he's sort of saying what it's really all about is it's life-centered. And that's yes. And what the hell does that mean? And how do I actually translate that into being able to bring it into the projects I do, the health system I'm trying to transform, the community I'm trying to enable to come back to life that had been decimated, the ecosystem that I've watched degrade over years that I care about. These are incredibly complex, delicate sets of beautiful interactions that are constantly moving. So that's what life is. So how do you actually build the thinking skills and build the being skills to be able to manage yourself in a continuously complex, unpredictable environment and be able to extract meaning from it for yourself, as opposed to looking for the expert who's going to give it to you? That's a whole set of skills that in a lot of traditions, people spent their lifetime learning how to do that. But for the way we conduct business and places, we've abandoned that because we're looking for this manageable uniformity. Make it efficient, make it so that we use less energy, we use less trouble and bother with it. So that's a lot about what's involved in that. It's very practical. It applies to our personal lives, to our work lives, to our community lives, and beyond that.
What comes up, and let me see if I can dovetail this in a succinct way, is that I've heard you talk about sustainability, in that sustainability, we may not have just grasped onto the concept of it in a way that appreciates it. I think that it has become a rallying cry in regenerative design that sustainability is about doing less bad. So what does good look like? And that's a very catchy saying that people have caught on to. But whenever I hear you, it makes me think of a much different thought process than doing bad versus doing good.
Well, and I think there's a larger picture in that has what's been concerned me about and we address this if you've read the book, that we're so quick to adopt the new in order to feel like it's something of value. And we never really deepen enough understanding. So I think there's nothing wrong with sustainability except our understanding of what it is and what it requires. But we abandon it and turn to the next technique, as opposed to what does sustainability really mean? If you look at how has life sustained itself over some 4 billion years, if we could understand that, then that sets a pretty high goal for us. And regeneration is one tool in that. It's not the only one, but it's a critical one that we've are starting to finally begin to understand. It's not just making things better. It's not just making something healthier. We're actually growing the capability of living systems, people and ecosystems and so on, that they take over the captainship in the sense of their own evolution collectively, because evolution is never the way life is beautifully made. It's never singular. There's no evolution except in coevolution, which means everybody who's going to be involved in it has to have developed themselves to bring something of value to the party in that. And so how do we, as a practitioner, look at the whole beautiful mess of a system, of the people, of the place, of the all of the more than human species that inhabit it, and say, how do they come together around the uniqueness of this place? And how do I help them each create more that they can contribute to that, so they're all part of a value-adding collection and system that they're bringing together? That requires a lot of mental management to be able to, to be able to hold all those. And we're not, there's almost nowhere in modern cultural education where we help kids begin to see and hold that level of pattern understanding of what a dynamic moving world involves, to be able to work with it. So that's why, for me, this technology has been so powerful. And I'm sure you keep hearing from, we need a new way of thinking. We need a new mental model. We need a new paradigm. We need the capability to continue to evolve paradigms. And that's a whole different level of capability that is learnable. When we, as early humans and indigenous people, land-based cultures, knew how to do that. And we've forgot it in a lot of cases, or it's been held on and demeaned and diminished and separated. So, and one of the beautiful discoveries is these things come together: ancient cultures and wisdoms from land, ancient spiritual traditions. There's a crossing among those that's beginning to emerge that allows them to be friendly to a range of cultures in how they present. So one of the things that we have let ourselves be confused by is the difference between scale, the effect of making change at scale, and the effect of how evolution and change really work in life. So the tendency is we've got to change everything. We've got to make global changes. And if you look at how whole systems change through a change of the sort of state and being of all of the different elements that make it up, it's like it connects and flows in ways that we could not possibly predict. You can actually see it in human history, the what we would call the fall of the Soviet Union. That was some people say, well, simplistically, it was the fax machine that did it. That people were able to connect. But what it did was, it was, in a sense, it's like people were able to share and connect and build these pathways. But what was happening was, in small ways across multiple places, these new energies, which happens we think of them in ecosystems, were happening in the spirit and thinking and understanding and the revision of who they were and what life was about. And when they connected, it went like wildfire. Nobody could have predicted that it went with the speed that it went. It was just simply stunning. And we're seeing, if you look at the way the globe operates, it's really, Earth is made up of unique energy fields. Each place has its own energy field that creates and shapes particular conditions and it contributes to what the system as a whole needs to. We've been gradually replacing these, but it isn't that you have to change everything. If you get enough people working in some of those key fields in bringing that different way of, it's like the spirit and energy that for humans hold a different future and start to work in a different way and reconnect to who they are. These things connect by wildfire. The idea of regeneration, when we started Regenesis, if you Google wasn't around for a while, but when it was, regenerative development, which we chose instead of regenerative design, was the only thing you found was when people, about transplanting, medical journals. But and for a while it was like nothing. And suddenly it's like out of nowhere, it's like, this is what we need to do to solve things. And it's shifting all over the world how things work. So part of what we're trying to do at the Institute, and part of it, we have access to that in ways that we're very lucky to have a sort of a view of what's happening. But as we started working with practitioners in line with the notion of working from place, began to more and more focus first the regenerative practitioner courses around people coming from the same place, same region, and then enabling them to begin to connect and grow a community that began to shift and connect to how just a whole different vision of who they were and who their place was. And those are gradually taking it. It's below the radar. It's not meant to take on big changes. There's enough of that, getting attention. It's on the ground work that is shifting the culture that people are beginning to frame who they are and how their place is and who it is. And so there's these communities are beginning to emerge. Auckland, there's, it's like small numbers of maybe 150, 200 people. It's up to 200 people who are now in various aspects of life in New Zealand and in Aotearoa are beginning to work and connect with each other and support each other and grow regenerative culture back again. And it's joined with the Maori culture and given a Western language to what was always the wisdom that was always there. And they're beginning to enrich each other. So they're shifting things that are already starting to change how people think about their place and being the role we have in our places. And it's happening in Europe. It's starting to happen less so in the United States. It's slower here. We've had, I think, some setbacks. Australia. So I'm not unoptimistic. Change has its own transformative change has its own pattern and pace. Mm. And I think it's as long as we resist the sense that we need to change everything everywhere, which is where we get into manageable uniformity again. It's like, how do we wake up the incredible potential and life creativity of unique places and people all over the world?
That is a great generative question that I hope everybody really sits with, because if I'm understanding correctly, this is such a localized, emergent process for individuals that creates culture. And let me see if I can pivot to something that I'm curious about.
It's very broad and probably added to the esoteric nature of it. I apologize for that.
It is amazing to know that there is thought leadership within the design development arena, because if it's just based on a thought path of supply and demand within the real estate industry, then we're going down a very interesting road. And that's where I want to bring this in is we came to the conclusion that we wanted to marry together regeneration and real estate. And that sometimes feels like an oxymoron, because real estate, of how it is culturally practiced, feels very much like it is a commodification of place. But we kept looking at regenerative agriculture and feeling like that is the tenets of it, of giving life back. in building upon itself, not in more of a virtuous cycle, is the tenets that we can see of how it fits in with place and with home and with dwelling. And so I'm curious what your take is on just the frame of regenerative real estate.
And one of the powerful, because everybody needs to live somewhere, and everybody is has some interest in how they live and where they live. So it's universal. I mean, we are embodied beings, and we need to be on the earth somewhere. So it to begin with, it's an arena in which has enormous potential for making this nature change meaningful to people. It's not abstract. Where we live, how we live, they're all take on an increasing meaning. The interesting thing is that real estate is one of the first things we do in the Regenerative Practitioner is start with what's the very ground for working from, is what we call place source potential. We don't start with trying to fix where we live and make the better community or improve a lot of people are working on that, doing good work. But how do we start with really understanding what is unique about the place that people inhabit, and what's our role in its evolution, so we have a meaningful connection to that. So if it's a neighborhood, if it's part of a community, if I'm looking at real estate that's a home in a watershed out in the outskirts of an urban area, what does it mean to be in that place? One of the things we've done to ourselves is we've become less and less capable of creating meaningful lives for ourselves. And, it was Hannah Arendt who was the one who wrote so beautifully about the seedbed for tyranny and tyrants is the lonely mind who can't create meaning for themselves. So they look for outside themselves for somebody to give them meaning. But where we live and how we live together is a huge source of meaningfulness, where we can see and create a role for ourselves that has significance in what's important. So real estate as an opportunity to begin to create a field in which people can start to see, wow, this is why I love this place. If there's really something, what can I do to make sure that specialness is here? And then what we need to do is to understand that we can't wall it off. We kill it the minute we wall off. Life doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't work that way. So how do we start to see the sort of nested relationships that enable my house, my neighborhood, to be reciprocally beneficial? But my neighborhood exists within the next, within the city. What happens with it if it's not being grown and evolved and developed to my neighborhood? And therefore, to me, I can abandon it. I can just take off, or I can actually see, if I understand what I really care about and connect to, then I can start to see within that complex of relationships, hey, there's something I can contribute to that. And there are very practical ways to think about it and understand how to do that. So everything starts in the Regenerative Practitioner starts with that. Where on earth can we see the possibility to make a difference? It's meaningful to us, grows our value in the world we value. And real estate is an absolutely critical opportunity for being able to do that. So it means instead of selling it based on, the value and all the peripheral stuff, it speaks to who do you want to be? I think it's a perfect place to do that. And it requires an enormous amount of change in the industry and the field.
I was not setting you up for that answer. Please note that this is, and for the listeners out there, this is actually me trying to grapple with my own understandings of real estate, an industry that I've been working in for a long time, of regeneration and now technology application within real estate, and in trying to also honor what's come before, and how to my own process of how to tap into source, spirit, place, because I'm finding now that I'm getting called into a leadership position. And if I don't ask these questions to people like yourself, Pamela, then I feel like it's a disservice that I imagine others have felt. This is what happened to sustainability, is that corporate interests have co-opted words for their benefit, where we still need to help people buy and sell real estate to function in a financial sense. But we are finding that we have to hold space for the meaning and the deepness and the richness, and trying to figure that out. And that's why, we, especially as a white male that comes from a privileged background, when I hear people say, this is time for you to sit it out, I have to go through this internal process of, well, what does that mean, and how I can't just sit it out and blend back into the homogeneity of culture, and but how do I hold space, and how do we invite others, and how do I go through the process of remembering what my role is? So I appreciate.
What do you see as your role? Have you articulated a role for yourself? Because that's a pretty critical element in our work.
That is something that I've been working on for a long time, and more that I really sit with that, the more I realize that it is a connector.
So what's the system? Because there's no role, nothing called a role except in relationship to a system. You can't have a role just sort of free floating somewhere. In the same way that the meadow in an ecosystem has a particular role, that if it weren't in that ecosystem, its role would change, or it wouldn't have a role. That's often. So what is the system that you are defining a unique role for yourself and the work you do? And what is the particular contribution it's making to moving that system up to a different level of value?
Thinking in terms of an ecosystem and how to strengthen it and to find those overlapping areas is the work that I am discovering, is that I'm quite compelled to. That how do we see the linkages, but it is really how do we bring together a greater ecosystem of people and organizations and resources in order to have collective conversations to really rethink and recalibrate as we go down this path.
So what would you bring into being? What would not be there that's not there now that would be if you were able to carry out this role?
What arises is more of a mindfulness of how we inhabit and how we dwell and how we build and how we design. And that is something that even in the doingness of our work, going from I'm here to help you buy your dream home, or I'm here to help you sell your house for the most amount of money in the least amount of time, to go kind of full spectrum into another arena of what does the place look like that is going to resonate with you, and how do we connect back to place? That is something that I find the shift is it's going from commodity to the potential of place and a role in it. Maybe I'm losing myself in thought here.
But. No, that's okay. Part of it is saying, what is is it the whole that you're working on, people who want to, who are becoming homeowners, and does it then by affecting, bringing that consciousness to them and the way they shape? We're seeing now that there's a huge shift in what it means to be a vegetarian these days. It was enormously difficult. Carol's daughter started very young, decided she wanted to be a vegetarian. My granddaughter just decided that she was starting with it at age 5, but now at 10, a year ago, that's it. I'm a vegetarian. Look at how much the entire fooding industry has shifted around people who want to move away from meat towards a plant-based diet. So what shifted that was not the people who grow and produce, it was the people who consume and who choose to shift. So if you're looking at what you want to do is there's a whole people who are looking to shift how they choose where and how they live, how they occupy real estate. Just, and what would they, it's like, this is start to see how these systems nest, suddenly sees the influence. This is what we were talking about before. You may not have to change everybody who is the consciousness they have and what they hold is what is a source of vitality for them and meaning. But if you change enough, they start to shift. The people who are shaping the industry and how cities create neighborhoods, how, it's not, you start to see it rippling out to this larger systems. But you need to see that set of relationships and sort of focus in. I put a drop here and it begins to shift here because it's in their interest at this level. And oh my God, it's in their interest because that's shifting. That's how living systems actually work and create massive change. But it requires a clarity of thinking. I think you're on the path to it, but it requires a sorting through a pattern of relationships and relatedness that then you're intentionally navigating and creating.
I hope that we can all understand that this is a process. It's not a destination, and it's not necessarily a product. That's something that we've been really expanding upon lately for people that have been tuning in. And this really goes to highlight it, that I sincerely appreciate just the way that we can continue to learn about living systems, because this is not something that we necessarily were brought up in or educated on. And so for me, it takes tremendous mental fortitude and energy to help maintain that line, to really keep going whenever it can be a pretty tough mental exercise.
It's the impact of this work. I mean, I'm pretty clear that I and the rest of us are always fumbling towards getting better and better at doing this, but it's almost like this is a thread that has over centuries and millennia of life. And we're stewards for this, to bring it back, as you are. I mean, and we're all learning, we're all gradually moving and evolving ourselves and becoming human beings again that can care and connect. So, and take the discipline. I mean, one of the things when I talk about it, as opposed to, I would suggest Ben Haggard is another one who's been very deeply worked with from the beginning. He will beautifully make things succinct and a whole different way of working with it, which is why we work together and we're sort of constantly bouncing off each other. But there's a real discipline to this work. It's not something that's about being feel good and so on. Really roll up your sleeves and be prepared to work on developing and managing the complexity in oneself and in the world, but getting enormous reward in a much more meaningful life. That, we all have something to contribute, and there's nothing more powerful than being able to keep growing that and keep being grown by it.
That is such a wonderful place to just put a chapter end to this conversation. And I hope that we get to continue into another chapter.
Well, I would be derelict if I didn't also sort of put in a plug which is what, to do all this talking, is I really would encourage people to explore as an entry point to this path, the Regenerative Practitioner, TRP. It's a 6-month course. It's really the equivalent of taking a graduate degree, but it's all immediately woven right into your work. It's not something you step away from. You are applying it every step of the way. And we now open up for applications twice a year. We have another round that's opening up in the fall. And we have cohorts going right now, 5 cohorts. One reaches all the way to Qatar, Europe, Canada, US, 2 or 3 in the US, Europe, further also out into Australia, New Zealand, and another round starting up. And so it's just the Regenesis Institute. You can find us on the web.
Okay, everyone, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for tuning in to another great episode. If you're not already a subscriber, please do so wherever you get your podcast. You can create good karma by leaving a review on Apple Podcast or sharing this show with your friends. If you're looking for ways to get more involved in the regenerative real estate movement, then you are in luck. We have a Facebook community conveniently called Regenerative Real Estate that you can join and be a co-creator with us on this journey. If you have a business or organization that you feel is aligned with our mission to use real estate as the catalyst for a regenerative future and would like to work together, then please be sure to get in touch. We are building an ecosystem to help amplify your work and message, where you can present to our community or sponsor the work that we are doing. You can do this by reaching out to us at team@chooselatitude.com. Last, and certainly not least, this podcast is enabled by the people that buy and sell real estate with us through our network of Latitude regenerative change agents located across North America. Our goal is to help transform homes and habitats, person by person, property by property. And we do that by combining the skills of a real estate professional with sustainable and regenerative consultation. It is time that we all start to live our values, and we hope to work with you on your next real estate sale or purchase. Okay, that is all for now. In the words of Paul Hawkins, remember that we are either stealing our future or healing our future. We are hard at work trying to do the latter. So until next time, be well.